Welcome back to Relentless. I am really humbled and excited about this episode. If you're here joining us for the first time, thank you for coming. If you're coming back, thank you as well. I hope you'll take the time to subscribe to the podcast, share it with people that you think it would be beneficial for. And we're going to jump right into this episode because it's pretty deep. It's a pretty deep topic and difficult for sure, but at the same time, that the whole point of this podcast is to help people see they can come through some very difficult things and change the world.
Yes.
So if you are listening or watching from out of state and you don't know where I am recording, I'm blessed to live in a great city, Charlotte, North Carolina, where we have an unbelievable community of small business owners, entrepreneurs, just individuals that are taking on the world with their passions. And through that network is how I met my next guest, Hannah Kay.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to come on this platform and share your story. I know that can be intimidating and scary, but you're doing it, and there's going to be many lives touched, I believe, by your willingness to do that. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
So before we get into your story, tell us a little bit about who Hannah Kay is, where you're from originally, your hobbies, interests, just a little bit of the surface everyday stuff.
Yes. So every day, I'm originally from Springdale, Arkansas, which is in the northwest corner of Arkansas, by the University of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. My entire family went to the University of Arkansas. I was actually the first one in my family to go away to college.
Okay.
And I went to the University of Georgia, which I know we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yes.
Some of my hobbies, I love to travel. And this is a newly engaged hobby, traveling alone, which is sort of my new thing. I also am newly into hiking, which is crazy.
Nice.
But I really love here in North Carolina, especially in Charlotte. You have the beach just a little ways away. You have the mountains a little ways away. And so it's great just to be able to hop away for the weekend and do that.
We're very lucky. We live in a great city.
Yes,
we really
do.
Yeah. So we met just a few weeks ago. And I was so excited about your story because what I try to present on this podcast is everybody has things that they're going through. And people experience it in different ways. They take longer to get through them sometimes. But your story has so many twists and turns that I found so exciting. And I still haven't got to the bottom of some of it. So I want to figure out how exactly you got through it all. But we're talking about domestic violence today.
Yes.
And it's, the statistics are very clear. It happens a lot more than we think it does, probably less reported than it should be.
Absolutely.
So, one of the first questions, first of all, just give us kind of the background, like when you were married to begin with, kind of start off the story that way.
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I went to the University of Georgia. That is my very first week there. I met this guy and he was great, and we ended up dating in college, as all college relationships goes. Well, except for not all, because you have a good one. Yeah. But so we dated on and off in college, and then our lives went separate ways. I moved to Washington, D.C. He was in Georgia. Then he moved to Washington, D.C. with me, and he was my college sweetheart. I knew him for so long, and then after about 10 years, we got engaged, and then 2 years after that, I can't even remember the timeline. A year after we got engaged, we got married. And it actually turned into an abusive marriage. So then the worst night of my life was Super Bowl Sunday. It was actually Super Bowl Sunday 5 years ago. And so we just passed the 5-year anniversary. Yeah. And it was just, I couldn't hide or explain away this pain that was happening to me behind closed doors when it looked like I had this perfect life on the outside. I was married to my college sweetheart. We both had great jobs. We're active in the community. And behind closed doors, that just wasn't the case.
Yeah. And those things don't just happen overnight.
Right.
And there are many avenues, I would assume, that it starts to display itself. So one of the first things I think of is, did you, in trying to help young women that are coming up, that are in relationships now, trying to prepare them and give them your hindsight, because it's 2020.
Yes, 100% 2020, yes.
Did you, looking back now, if you were more aware of the potential, were there signs that you saw in the beginning?
And yes, hindsight is 100% 2020. And it, one of the things that I had always heard just from anybody talking was, in a marriage, everyone fights. Well, now, again, hindsight 2020, everyone doesn't fight. Everyone disagrees. There's different levels of
altercation,
fighting, if you will. Yes, altercation. And so in the back of my mind, I thought, well, maybe this is how every relationship is. If I leave this one and go into another one, at least I know how this one's going to be. So why would I leave another one to go into this other relationship? And so one of the things that I want people to know is, no, not everyone fights. That's not the case.
Right.
And you said, are there signs? And that is one of the questions that I get asked a lot. Like, when did you start seeing things? And my answer is always hindsight's 2020, because I don't think that I did. And especially then, people weren't really talking about it, which is why I really want to talk about it too.
Right.
To know, again, not everyone fights. This isn't the way to handle things.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. There are so many cliches and stigmas that go around relationships and philosophies of belief, religious belief. We'll get into some of that later. But I think that's a good point to point out, is sometimes there is no precursor. Sometimes there are no signs.
Right.
And then you come to a point of life where you have to decide, okay, am I going to make a path shift here? Because in situations where there were signs and you knew them, that's kind of a different story at that point.
Well, and also I think that it's extremely important, no matter if you don't want to hear it on the other side, if someone sees this in you, to speak up at that point. Because I actually had people, again, later after I was getting divorced, that said, your house used to look so happy, and then all of a sudden it went dark. And one of the main reasons was because I used to always keep this light on in my house in the front entry, and that was my thing. I always kept it on. And then slowly but surely it physically went dark in my house.
Yes.
Because it was just
in more figuratively and literally.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, of the signs of someone being in a relationship that's abusive. So you were dating for 10 years.
Well, not fair. So we had known each other for 10 years.
Right.
And
that's okay. My husband was my best friend's ex-boyfriend. So
okay. Right. I love that. Good episode.
Go back and watch that one.
Yes. And so we actually didn't date until sort of the end of, he's a couple of years older, so he was about to graduate and I was going off to study abroad. We dated before that, and then that's why we broke up, because he was graduating and I was going to study abroad.
Right.
Then when I moved to DC, I actually, again, kind of hindsight 2020, we went our own separate ways. We always texted or called on birthdays, holidays, throughout the year occasionally. I actually went back and looked through kind of our texts and stuff, even when we were married and it was good in the happy times. He had courted me for 2 years. He was in Georgia, I was in DC. But, we'd kind of date other people every now and then. But going back, it was 2 solid years that he was,
keeping that
trying
contact.
to get back together. And,
Yeah.
I was like, no, we're in 2 different cities.
And I think that's such a great point to make, is so something changed with him. So everything seemed to be moving along as it should in any relationship that's, learning your way and figuring each other out. But eventually down the road, something changed with him that made your situation turn out differently than you ever expected.
Right. And one of the things that I will say is, in our 2 years of marriage, we did go through a lot. We both had new jobs. He moved to DC, then I moved to Georgia. Everything. One of the things that I know I mentioned to you, we may talk about in a little bit, but when things started to go a little awry, because he also was starting his own company at the time, just all the stressors that come with that. And so we actually went to see a therapist who just told us that was just what newlyweds that's a normal newlywed.
Did you share with them specifically that he was being physically abusive?
So I mean, truth be told, I probably did not say those words. In my mind, I was probably trying to but
give the hints.
I don't. To be fair, I don't know that I did. Well, we were in the same room.
Right.
It wasn't a one-on-one. We were both together.
Right.
So
I think that's so when I'm talking to people about their health, my relentless mindset is you have to keep going, you have to keep going. So in that situation, you obviously were afraid and scared, so you didn't want to just come out and say the thing. But you did eventually come out with that, but it was a process. So what was your internal dialogue from the progression of the very first time there was a physical involvement through the situation? So what was that? Because I know that there are women going through it right now.
Right.
And they're thinking a certain way. So what was going on in your mind while it was happening, when it really started getting bad?
Yes, and that is another thing about domestic violence also, is that the apologies come afterwards. Every case is different. Let me preface that for sure. But a lot of the statistics say it's bad, and then it's the super over the top, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again, and it's just this vicious cycle. And so for me, in my head, when everybody fights, it's sort of, okay, well, this is the one situation, it's going to happen to the next. And then looking back, I sort of, probably again, not as verbally as I thought in my head, but felt like I was calling out and giving little teasers and saying, I don't think things are going great, and wanting someone to give me permission to leave my marriage.
Right.
But I didn't tell anyone. I didn't really talk about it until I couldn't hide the bruises and the marks.
Right.
And that was the Super Bowl Sunday incident when there was no hiding it.
Yeah. So now that you've on the other side, we'll talk more about your after story later, but you're out speaking now with different groups and trying to be an inspiration and encouragement to people, I'm sure you're getting people come to you and say, this is my story, this is what I went through. How are you trying to help people rationalize, the situation? Because I had a friend go through something very similar. And I remember her always thinking, if I would have done this differently, if I would have said this or done this at this time, or always trying to figure out how she could fix it. But I kept telling her, this has nothing to do with you. First of all, none of us are perfect.
Right.
So we're mistakes made on both sides, of course, because we're human.
Yeah.
But what is it that you're trying to get across to women and men too, because men suffer from this as well, in that transitional period of how to keep going, because you have to get out at some point.
You do. And it is not easy. And I'm going to kind of take it back a little bit too, because that doesn't go away.
Right.
And even today, I actually had this feeling of, I'm having a really bad day. I have a bunch of trigger warnings that happened last night and today. And I was like, I don't know how I can get up and talk about this.
Yeah.
And that doesn't go away, because it's always, what if one thing would have changed? What if it were different? What if I were still living in Georgia in my dream home and a house full of kids and this and that? And you can't say what if.
Right.
You pick up your boots, as hard as it is. Trust me, it is so hard. And look towards the future. And what I think is important, and why I share my story, is it's so important for us to know that we are not alone.
Right.
We're not the only ones. There are so many people going out there. And so when I go out and speak and someone comes up to me and says something, the first thing I say is, thank you for sharing.
Right.
Thank you for telling your story, because it is so important. And even if I'm the only person that they tell, just to tell someone. And for me and for everyone, every case is different. So it's hard to give this blanket
This
thing.
is what you do.
Right, exactly. I know we'll get into this in a minute, but the nonprofit that I partner with, DomesticShelters.org, is a great resource for nationwide to learn the signs and the resources and to be able to talk about them.
So it's just like with your health, when you have something wrong with you that can't be diagnosed because it doesn't have a test for it, you have to stay relentless in finding health.
Yeah.
In a situation like this, you have to keep going till you get the right people in your corner.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a reminder, number one, is who is in your corner, your friends. Are they true friends that can see these things and be there for you when you speak to them? But then even further from that is you don't get in the place where you are and get stuck.
Right.
Keep going, keep looking.
Yes.
So back, to the situation where you were, you didn't have children.
Did not have children.
Okay, so that's one big component.
Right.
That some
and I am very aware
people,
of the people who have children
Right.
and have to figure out a whole new plan
Yeah.
because that's a whole different scenario that I did not have.
But I know, so we talked earlier, so once you had come through a time of that back and forth of a physical altercation happening, the apology, okay, should I stay, should I go, that working that out in yourself, you had kind of a day where it couldn't be hidden anymore.
Right.
So that helped you almost cross over to making a decision. And tell us about that day.
Absolutely. So the worst night happened on Super Bowl Sunday. My dad actually lived 45 minutes to an hour away. And every single month we had a daddy-daughter date. Whether it was hanging out all day, just hanging around the couch, watching movies, or going to lunch, whatever. You did not miss daddy-daughter day for anything.
Yeah.
So Super Bowl Sunday, daddy-daughter day was scheduled for Wednesday. I knew that my bruises and marks were not going to go away. So I remember saying pretty soon after, I have to tell Daddy. Like, I'm not canceling this daddy-daughter date. And truth be told, that was probably the thing that got me to say, because it would have been so easy for me to stay home and make excuses and hide it away. But it was that one thing, which is why it's also super important to continue checking in on your friends and just the simple check-in, because that may be their opportunity.
You could have made a different decision that day and have still been there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's so important to be aware of our community, aware of our friends. So, so you shared with your husband, I am not going to cancel with my dad. You had to be scared.
Right. Yeah. So
was there a component with you every day that you, because that's part of some of the reading I was doing was, were you every day worried you were going to make him mad to cause him to do something? Or was it out of the blue for him? Like, what was the dynamic?
So that's an interesting question. That's a really good question to think about, because I don't know. I think it was just random. I don't... Because if it were every day and I would be able to predict it, then right. Yeah. And so it wasn't that I could have picked up on or that I ever did pick up on. And I didn't know what would trigger it. And so that's a really good question. I've never thought about that.
Well, there's so many ways you can go with the psychology behind why someone would step into the realm of physical abuse, and you probably will never know, and we can't figure that out. It's just like when we talk about a murderer, we can't comprehend that. That's not in our realm of thinking, because we don't think that way. Someone that is transitioned into physical violence, we can't comprehend it. But thinking of other women in this situation, I know that some people, they're in a relationship where they know there's a temper or there's anger that they have seen for years. And so they're planning their day, their speech, they're watching all those things, which I think it's such a great example of your situation is not all situations are the same, like you said. There is no standard protocol for who this might happen to. There is no, I did this, so this happened. Or if I look out for this and this type person, that this might happen. It's just something you have to be aware of, and then prepare for it if it happens to show itself.
And one of the things that I also want to bring up, because also since I've started telling my story, a lot more people have come up, because one of the forms of abuse that is actually more prevalent and is the emotional abuse. So you don't have those physical scars and that. And some people have actually said to me, well, I wasn't really abused because it was like emotional abuse. And I thought, well, no, because the words, those always stay with you.
Yes.
The bruises, the pain can go away, but that is also so hard.
Absolutely. Well, I'm with my story, I did not suffer any physical abuse from my father, but he was very emotionally and verbally abusive. And it does stick with you. Yes. And I remember thinking as a child, I wish, this is horrible to say, but it's my truth. I remember at times that I wish he would have hit me so that there could have been proof of how mean he was. But in my situation, that I learned as a teenager how to look out for temper. So that's, when I ask you about your precursors, obviously you had a great relationship with your dad.
Yes.
So you had a great example of what a man should be. So
it wasn't
again, you came from a situation and repeated it. It wasn't that at all. But yeah, emotional abuse is very huge. And another interesting point that I wanted to make along the same lines of every situation is different is financial abuse.
Yes.
And you don't even think about that unless you've been through it or unless you're studying or talking about this topic. But, in a situation where there's a marriage and there's children and the wife decides maybe even at an early age she wants to stay home with the children, that's the role that she wants to play. There are many cases where the finances are completely the man's responsibility and he has all the bucket knowledge of it. She has nothing and is living happily and taking care of the kids, and that's the role she wants. 10, 15 years down the road, something happens. She has absolutely no identity and nothing to go on. Have you met anyone in that situation?
I have, and I actually want to tell another story also that people don't think about because domestic violence isn't only about women. It's about men too. Yes. And we all think a lot of times if it is the financial abuse, it's also that the man is making the money and he's withholding it from his wife or something. So actually that's something that I really want to talk about because what people always think about is the man holds the money from the woman. And domestic violence is not only about women. Men are abused as well. And one of the things, people don't always think that men can be financially abused.
Right.
There's a story that actually, that I know, that a man was making all of the money. He would bring it home. His wife would immediately take it from him and would give him an allowance. And he was the one that was making the money. And that, was complete opposite. Right. And so, again, to the outside world, it looked as if, well, he was making the money and poor not giving it to her, when in reality it was the other way around.
Yeah. So there are many ways this could play out. I think the underlying thing that needs to be pointed out is if you're being mistreated on any level, if someone is putting you under them and controlling, it's all about power. Yes. That's what abuse is about power and how it can play out in many different ways. Then you need to start getting help. And you need to start asking questions and feel empowered to do that because no one should live that way.
Right.
In those situations, what advice were you giving those people, or how did you say to proceed?
Right. Yeah. So knowing those warning signs and just talking about this and knowing with financial abuse that it's not always the man, it's not always the woman, because even the man at that point thought, oh, well, this is how it is. Right. And just talking about it and saying, a lot of times people usually talk to me after they have gotten out as well. So when they're in there and when I can help them, it's calling out the signs. When you see somebody out and you see somebody that's not feel good, right? And
you get that intuition,
yes,
which we talked about in the suicide episode. Talking is so important because it can start the conversation and start someone in the right direction.
It is.
So what you're saying is when you, first of all, we have to be looking. We have to be engaged with other people and not consumed with ourselves. Right. But don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to bring it to someone's attention. Hey, I noticed this. Are you aware of it even?
Yes.
Or are you okay with that? Or is that how you guys plan it out?
Right.
Is that kind of what you would say?
Yes, exactly. And I go by, again, different situations because there's so many different situations. But sort of the signs, are they isolating someone? Are they, as you said, talking in that power tone? Are they pushing them physically around?
Right.
Do, just there's so many.
Yeah.
But if you see something, it feels wrong, just sort of check in a little bit. Give the opportunity for somebody to say,
Right.
no, I'm not actually okay.
Right. And it takes courage to do that as well.
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes.
To be that friend.
Yes.
Speaking of the signs of abuse, I'm just going to go through a couple that I was researching about and let me know if you experienced them or, how that could play out in a relationship so that other people can get an idea of what this might look like.
And to tie back in for your listeners too, as you go through these signs of abuse, like really pay attention if these are the things that somebody's going to
because it could be
stick
it
out.
could have been going on for so long that is your normal.
Right. Yes.
I always go back to health because that's my thing.
Right.
But some people are so unhealthy and have been so unhealthy for so long. That's just
their
their normal and they don't realize it.
Right.
And if they start eating healthy, start moving more, and they start feeling better, like, I feel really good.
Right.
I can feel like this.
Right.
I can be out of pain. Yes.
Yeah. And it's sort of, you learn how to maneuver in that awful situation.
You compensate.
Yes.
Yes, that's one of the things I'll point out in just a moment. So we already kind of brought it out a little bit, but the partner, man or woman, whichever, is putting the other person down in front of others. Now, there's a line, people.
Right.
We obviously, my husband and I, we pick on each other. We both have things that we're going to pick on each other for, but intellectually we know and we can hear when there is demeaning going on.
And I think with that one, that is really one that it ties back into the emotional abuse, right? Because you're saying something about someone,
right?
That it's not, you're not seeing it, right? It's just kind of going in the head. And I will 100% admit, and it's been called out to me too, that I would do that sometimes. And it was called out to me that was sort of my defense mechanism. Like, oh, I'm out. Like, I can maybe say something that I wouldn't be able to anywhere else. And I've heard that actually a lot more coming out too.
You're trying to put up a fight in the way that you could.
Right. That it's sort of this
situation where you're protected.
Like, oh, well, I can. Me too.
Yeah.
And I've actually learned that a lot with sort of that more, I guess, the verbal abuse too. That sort of also could be a defense mechanism.
Natural defense.
And so with that, again, if you're looking at someone, hopefully it's somebody that you're close to that you know that you can kind of see. But if you're just out and you see a stranger like saying something, like maybe that's not actually the abuser.
Right.
Maybe it's the other way.
Right.
Other way.
So it could be that in navigating in that environment that you never planned to be in, some people may have a tendency to quiet, hush, protect, or have a natural tendency to fight back a little bit. So that's something we could be watching is, are they really just picking at each other, or is that a deeper issue that I hear going on?
Yes, and
I didn't even think about it being that way.
I hope I'm not like jumping ahead, but also going back, there's so many statistics with, I want to applaud all the law enforcement, police officers and things that go to people's houses when a call is being made, because there are so many times when the abuser will call and flip it. And in fact, I just met with somebody yesterday and we were talking about this because, it was sort of all of this, and then an object was thrown, and then all of a sudden that was the big blow up, when in fact that wasn't the case. That was one little piece. So that was sort of the defense, but then the police were called and it was back on the other person. And so you just have to really know, and if it's a one-sided issue or one time you're seeing it, like that,
which I think might be a good reminder of if you start to think you're stepping in this direction, it's time. You need to cut it off early, which I think would be hard because you're like, maybe it'll stop. which is where we need to get good advice from someone on the outside.
And there's so many different factors too, because, and I know you said we'll talk about religion too, but there may be religious or cultural beliefs that keep you staying in that relationship. And that is the case.
Yeah.
We already addressed the financial. Maybe you don't have the finances to get out.
Right. And we'll just go ahead and jump into the religious part.
Okay.
Because I hear that so much. So again, with what I do when I'm working with individuals one-on-one, they're coming to me because they have physical pain, but physical pain is usually an expression of mental and emotional stress. And I've heard it 1,000 times in my 10 years of, I've been in this relationship for 20 years and haven't been loved for like 15 of them. But I stay because I'm supposed to. And that just blows my mind. Especially when it crosses over into physical altercations. So you had some component of that with when you were going through your situation, getting out of it, just some influence?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, my parents were divorced when I was young. And so, I grew up with divorced parents. I knew for me that divorce was okay, but still for me, I didn't want to be judged or, we hadn't been married that long. So I didn't want to, people to judge, stigmatize, any of that. And so really for me, it wasn't, I need to stay because of this, because I had known that in my beliefs that divorce is okay. But sometimes that's outside just not pressure. The case.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I hear it a lot, and there's families that pressure their children to stay in the marriage because it's the right thing to do.
Well, and it may not even be, with family. Like I had people even very close to me who questioned, who said, are you sure? Are you sure? Now, these are people who did not see me. They lived elsewhere.
Right.
So I think if somebody would have seen me, it's a different story.
Right.
Because pictures didn't do justice either, by the way.
Yeah.
But it was, are you sure? Are you, is this really, can we work it out? And I do understand. I don't fault them in any of them that said that, but just, that wasn't helpful.
Right. I think it's a good point to make is if you are having a discussion with someone going through this situation, be cautious of what you say. You don't assume, you don't know all the facts. So assume the worst maybe. So if someone is coming to you telling you something's going on, believe it at face value. Be the encouragement. Be there to help in any way you can. Don't bring in a negative aspect and make it worse, which is difficult because we want to see what's wrong, fix it, and move on. And of course we want the best outcome for everyone, but if someone listen to what people say and go on what they say. I think that's the best advice for that. Another sign of abuse will be constantly worried about making the partner angry, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back into maybe there's not a pattern. You just don't know, and sometimes that can even be worse because you're like, if I said this yesterday, it was okay, but now today's a different day, and how's that going to come off?
Yeah, that's one you have to. That's a tough one because you can't plan for it, but you shouldn't have to plan for it. But we're talking about getting through it and getting out.
Yes.
This is another one for public viewing is always excusing your partner's behavior. So did you ever have a time when there was a physical altercation that happened that you had to make excuses in public?
I think, so for me, they weren't ever visible. So I mean, yes, but no, they weren't visible because I could hide them, It would be gone soon. Nothing was ever really, maybe like a little red mark or a little something, and I could put on a jacket. So I didn't have to say anything, but physically
you had to intervene in some way.
Hide it a little bit, like,
Yeah, you had to plan for it.
And let's be honest, not telling anyone is hiding it.
Yes.
And no one knew. My family didn't know. My friends didn't know until I opened up, and everyone was shocked. Everyone was shocked because
which is another scary part of telling your story is, are they going to believe me? Because there isn't that visible evidence
Right.
that you, in some situations, would have. Another sign of abuse is the partner is extremely possessive and jealous. That's going to be some obvious signs. And I'm sure you've talked with some people. Was that part of your dynamic?
Yeah, so with mine, kind of going back to when I said my house used to be happy and then it got dark, then it looked dark. One of the things was the blinds started closing all the time. So that happy where the light came through and then it went dark. A lot of people are isolated in the fact that they're, quote unquote, not allowed to go out. If they go out, then they're punished at home. Mine wasn't, it was, I mean, I still went out, but there was more sort of that disconnect too. But yes, the isolation. And for me, I didn't have that. I was still talking to my friends and family. I just wasn't telling them what was going on.
Right.
But one of the things is going through your phone. If your partner's going through your phone, trying to find something or not allowing you to talk to certain people that for no reason except for their own, you know, that's a problem.
Not right.
The jealousy, that's...
So these are all not only things to look out for in a marriage or a long-term relationship, but if someone is dating, these would be signs to look out for.
Yes, and especially with the cell phones for sure, but teens as well, with teen dating violence. And, a lot of the times it really starts with that jealousy and that possession. And in this day and age with social media, and I mean, it's just explosive.
Yeah.
And so it could start as young as that.
Which is a reminder to parents to have these conversations with your children early.
Yes.
And to be involved in the dating process, find out what type of home your child's boyfriend or girlfriend are coming from. See what that dynamic looks like. We have to be involved, not overbearing. You have an 18-year-old, but you have to be involved and be coaching them along the way. And, in my situation, I had this epiphany several years ago because I said my daughter's 18, but my husband's an amazing father, amazing husband, just a great person. And so I had this thought one day, wait, what if she thinks all men in the world are as good as him? I was like, okay, I have to step back and have conversations with her. Because what I always say is I learned how to have a good marriage and how to choose a partner from a bad experience. So I knew early I did not want to repeat what I experienced. That's what I learned. Well, now she's seeing this great person. So all guys that are cool and fun must be good, but they're not, So it's a great point to make is be involved with your kids young, because it starts so young, unfortunately.
Yes.
Be involved with your kids in that process. Would you have any advice for moms with children dating?
Yes. So really having those conversations with them, just like you said, let them know what a healthy relationship looks like. And so many people, I don't have children, so I'm not able to say this, but from what I hear, teens try to hide that they're dating someone or trying to hide their relationships because they feel like they can't talk to their parents about it. So let them know that you are their safe place. You can talk to them.
Open dialogue.
Now, don't encourage them to start dating at a young age.
Try to hold it off
because
as long
that's a
as
whole
possible.
other topic we could get on.
Yes.
But really just letting them know that you are that safe place that you can talk to and show them what a healthy relationship is.
And I think progressing from that point to as an older person, I think we don't spend enough time I can talk because I have 2 teenagers, so I can give advice.
Yes.
We'll see how they turn out if I'm not good. But, just having conversations with them young to help them prepare for the dating world and the relationships down the road. And what I did, you need to sit down with someone that you're potentially interested in and have serious conversations. It's not just about attraction and compatibility.
Yes.
We need to ask the big questions. What is your philosophy of religion? What is your philosophy of
how do you react when
children?
you get mad?
Watch them and see exactly. And that is exactly what I looked for is how do they respond to authority? How do they respond to bad situations when someone is wrong to them? Those are the things you need to look for if there would be any signs to be aware of.
Right.
But, sit down and have conversations. How do you want to handle our money if I'm going to stay at home? Am I going to have my own? have to ask those big questions in the beginning to hopefully keep things from happening and maybe stop some things from even starting if you see some of those signs. I think that's a great point to make and could probably save some people for some bad situations. And the last one I had for signs of abuse was, you already mentioned it, people stop spending time with friends and family. That's a sure sign something is up. And I'm sure that's a very common one. And you gave a very exact reference, was my house was bright and happy, literally, and it just went dark. So that's visible.
Right.
You know?
Right. And it's not always visible. And maybe somebody's making an excuse for why they're not going out. But if they continue making all of these excuses and they used to go out and they used to do things, no, again, every situation's different.
Yeah, and seasons of life, you get busy or whatever.
Yes, but there's that change.
Yeah.
Or if all of a sudden, if somebody says, I'm not allowed to talk to you, and there's not a backstory.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah. Be aware of your surroundings and the people in your life. That's what community is for. So we need to be more on top of that.
But with all of this, and I just can't reiterate enough that domestic violence, I thought that it looked like XYZ. And what in my head, what I thought it was is not going to be what somebody else thinks it is.
Right.
And that's why I say all the time, domestic violence does not look like one thing. You can't put it in one bucket.
Right.
And going back to everybody fights, well, that's a strong statement.
Right.
And so just because you're feeling that you're in a certain way and you can't put it into this exact bucket, don't hold back.
Don't push it to the side.
Don't right. Yes, don't push it to the side. That's a perfect way to put it. Because it's just like your health. Not everybody's going to have the same.
We're all snowflakes.
Pain
That's
point.
my saying.
Yes, all snowflakes.
And every relationship is different.
I think that's.
And I think another good thing to point out, and this is something we all need to be aware of, is yes, we have, cultural differences, and some cultures are more excitable than others, and some are more passionate than others. And I have heard a lot, well, that's just how we are. That's just how we talk to each other. That doesn't excuse it. No. And it can start something maybe you didn't plan for. And if you both have a bad day on that day, something could happen that you never intended. So I don't think that's just how we are or that's just how we talk is an acceptable excuse. No. Some people say we just yell. I don't think that's an appropriate way to communicate with anyone. No. And you can, by watching your tone, watching your expression, diffuse a situation. So we need to be adults about it. And if you have children, we need to be a better example to them of how to conduct yourself in a disagreement, because they are coming.
Yes.
I mean, you can't have a relationship with any person without having disagreements, and big ones, you know. I mean, finances will do that to people. How do you get through them? What are you showing your children?
And sort of pivoting just a slight bit, because this kind of came in when you were saying that too, there are times, like I mentioned earlier, when I had a trigger warning yesterday that I hadn't had in a long time. And it happened, and I was in the middle of a conversation, and it came on, and I just got up and walked out of the room because I knew that if I sat there, that was it, or tried to explain what was going on, I wouldn't be able
spiral.
to. I would.
Yeah.
And so I knew I had to get up, so I just got up. I left the room. I went into another room, and I had to, take deep breaths, sort of understand that was a trigger warning, because you don't know when those are going to come up.
And that's a big sign of healing. And that's a lot of people ask, will I ever get over this thing 100%? Will I ever be fully healed? So, and I, again, will associate it with health. Things are going to come up, things are going to happen, sickness is going to come into your body. We can't plan for everything. But the true sign of healing is being able to be aware, like you said, I was aware this thing happened. And visualization is huge. We use it a lot with athletes because they say that you can visualize doing a motion and your body doesn't really know if it's happening or not. So you visualize, let's just use volleyball for an example, serving that ball 100 times, and you get up to do it, you're going to do it better because you've got it in your brain, memorized exact body mechanics. So that's actually a question I was going to ask you, because we know these things are going to happen. You can't, even though you're out of the situation, you know you're safe, you know you're in a different place, you're choosing better things for yourself, you're going to hear a word, or you're going to hear a person, or you're going to see a person that reminds you of, and immediately your body is going to be back 10 years ago.
Yes.
And then your brain and all your fight or flight mechanisms kick in. So the true sign of healing is that you're able to put it into a frame, like you said.
And recognize it.
And you knew you needed to remove yourself from the situation because you could have fallen apart.
Right.
Or you could have started blabbing and talking about it and gone into a place where you lost 5 days of sanity, really, to that situation.
Yes.
So that was one of my questions for you. We know those things are going to happen. We know we're going to be in those experiences. So aside from that one situation where you just physically got up and moved yourself away, and maybe even back into those first years of recovery when you were coming out, what are some specific things that you did? Because when I am working with people one-on-one, or when I'm speaking to a group talking about being able to harness our body's ability to get down into the parasympathetic, out of the sympathetic, you have to start doing things, having things in your tool belt. What were some of the things when you were first coming out of the situation that you did, and maybe even some now, that you literally have in your tool belt ready, because that's the true sign of healing, is being prepared, that you've done to help yourself?
Yes. So one of the things is give myself permission to cry at any time. If if it happens, if I'm telling my story, if I'm hearing somebody else's story, it's okay to cry. That is something, because if you try to hold it in, it'll
come out eventually. And usually in like the worst place ever, in the middle of Target.
So that was sort of the thing that I do now. And I sort of, coming in, I said, this is a tough day. I'm having a really tough day today. So if I burst out in tears, I burst out in tears, but it's, being okay with that.
Right.
But with one of the things with healing, you go through the 5 stages of grief. And one of the things which was just has stuck with me still to this day is in those early days that I was going through this. I was still black and blue and healing, and another survivor that I did not know was a survivor came over and sat in my house and was talking with me. And that was the first time that I learned that I was going to go through the 5 stages of grief. And the particular stage of grief that stuck out with this woman was anger. And she said when she got to that stage, she went in her kitchen, she opened her cabinets, and she smashed all the plates. And that just was sort of her release. And so she said to me, if you get to that stage and you want to go break plates, go break them. And I never broke plates, but having that permission, there were so many times when I have never been that angry in my life. And I didn't know, but hearing somebody in the back of my mind say, it's okay to go in your kitchen and go break plates. And I'm not going to lie and say I didn't think about it.
So what did you do in those moments of anger?
Do you remember? I visualized me breaking plates. I did not physically break the plates, but I sort of visualized
if you wanted to.
Doing. Yes. Yeah. And that sort of was my release. And I don't think that person realized how big of an impact that was for me.
Which goes back to why you are sharing your story.
Yes.
If we don't make a good use of these hard times and make meaning out of them, then there really isn't a purpose. And I think we need a purpose for these hard times that we go through, and that's why you're here. And that's why we need to be on the lookout for people that have a similar story to us so that we can be a blessing, and that gives us a meaning or a purpose for what happened to us, I think, and helps us heal even more. Can you think of any other specific things that you would do even like today? So now we're removed from the situation. If you start to get anxious or have memories, what are some things in your tool belt that you do to help you find balance and peace?
Yeah, I do think that it is also for me, just when we started, just letting someone else know that I'm not okay today. And just letting someone else know, again, kind of gives yourself permission that if I fall apart right now, you're aware.
Right, yes.
I've warned
you're in on it with me.
But because trying to hold it all in, going back to way before, people ask, did you go to therapy? Did you do this? The answer is no. The only therapist I saw was the one with my
that didn't work.
now ex-husband, who said, you all are just newlyweds.
Yeah.
And so from that moment, no. And so it was sort of that telling someone, talking about it, having those little release moments for myself.
And that's part of the story that I wanted to get to with you specifically. So again, everyone's different.
Yes.
But I wanted to point out, so you said you had never traveled anywhere alone up to the point where you were married.
Right.
So after you talked to your dad, you went through the divorce process, you took a leap of faith and started traveling on your own.
Oh.
And that took you saying yes to life.
Yes. So I hadn't traveled. I didn't go anywhere alone. I may show up somewhere alone, but I always knew that there would be somebody there, because it was almost as if it was that cushion that if something happens, if I mess up, well, I'm not alone. I've got somebody else. And so after my divorce and, a few months later, my first real vacation, it was over the Christmas holiday, and I took a 2-week cruise by myself to the Caribbean. And that was I was scared to death. I'm not going to lie. Sure. But traveling alone, I learned so much about myself, that it is okay to be alone. I mean, I remember the night before the cruise took off, and I had dinner by myself for the first time ever. And I was sitting there going, well, I mean, I can do this. I can do it.
Yeah.
And so it was tough. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, I just felt like I could do it. I was more confident. But
so I think a good point to make is, in these crazy situations that you never expected, never saw coming, it might be a good idea to step outside the box and try some things completely new to you, so that you start a new positive feedback loop.
And I'm not telling everyone to go on it.
Hey, go on a cruise. Absolutely.
But those
it's healing.
Little things. Yes, it was very.
Yes.
But those little steps, those little things, because once you sort of ease into it and you realize you might be okay, and then you are okay, and you're like, oh, why didn't I do this?
There's a lot of psychology behind what you're saying, just so you know. You're creating new habits, you're creating that new feedback loop, and that's exactly what people need. So then you moved to California for a little while, and then from there?
After my divorce, or as I was going through the divorce, I had a job, and I told my boss I needed the time off, had the opportunity to move to California, and I had that opportunity to just start a brand new life that was 3,000 miles away from home. And once I was there, I just kept thinking about this shelter, this domestic violence shelter that I had encountered when I was in Georgia. Because before I moved out to California, I packed up my house and we donated it to the local domestic violence shelter. And what I saw at that shelter, and what I learned even just about domestic violence shelters, just stuck with me, that they're not just a bed or a roof. They provide safety, security programs to help survivors get back on their feet, victims of domestic violence get back on their feet, become survivors. And I just knew that deep down I wanted to do something to help those who don't have the support system.
Right. So again, through a traumatic event was born an effort to help people heal. Yes. Which is, I think, a huge part of the healing process. Which brings us to these lovely blankets that are here.
Yes.
So you made the decision to change careers, basically. So tell us about that process.
Yes. So I knew I wanted to help domestic violence survivors, and I just didn't kind of know how. I knew nothing about business, nothing about blankets, nothing about selling.
Right.
But I wrote a business plan for Thread Talk, and I learned that blankets and linens were some of the most requested items in shelters. And one thing which I have since learned, which is so interesting, is I have talked to so many people who have stayed in shelters and are back out, and some of the things that they say is they remember the feeling of those blankets on their bed when they were in these shelters. Or if they were cold, they were grateful to have that blanket to cover up in. And so knowing that blankets and linens were some of the most requested items in shelters, I came up with blankets. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs a blanket. Cozying mm-hmm. up. In those early days, I sat on my couch and I just cuddled up in a mm-hmm. blanket. Mm-hmm. So a portion of all of our proceeds are donated to domesticshelters.org, which is an existing nonprofit to fund critical wish list items to shelters across the country. Mm-hmm. And not every shelter needs a blanket. Maybe they have other people who already donate them. Right. But every shelter has some sort of need. Yes. And so we now fund those specific needs that the shelters request.
So these are all available online, different colors, different styles.
Yes, online, threadtalk.com. Mm-hmm. And this is our confidence and love blanket. We also have a gray, which is our serenity blanket. And we have some baby blankets as well. Wonderful.
Because there's just so many situations that people find themselves in, and they have children they're coming away with that need help and protection, and obviously children love blankets.
Yes.
They get attached to them. So I love that that's what you landed on, was something that is a constant. It stays around. Mm-hmm. And that's what you chose your actual products to make the blankets, is something that was sustainable.
And the other thing, too, is when you're wrapped up in a blanket, you think about that blanket. Who gave you that blanket? Mm-hmm. And so in those times mm-hmm. when you're feeling alone and you wrap up in a blanket and you're able to say, mm-hmm. I remember.
I was reading some of the reviews on your website, and it's so neat to read where some people that bought them, who they were giving them to, mm-hmm. and the stories behind it. And it's another time you can just be an extreme blessing to someone by that small gift that they, like you said, they know someone thought of them, and they feel loved and mm-hmm. cared for. And mm-hmm. that's just another step forward for them in that healing process. Yes. So with the company that you have, you're having an impact around the world, born out of a traumatic event that you went through, that you are healing and have healed from. Mm-hmm. So now, in the space and time that you're in now, what is your mindset? Because you're in a relationship now.
I am. Yes, I am.
Very happy.
Very, very happy.
And we're in a few before this one. And I'm sure there was a process that you went through that got you to where this one is actually working well.
Very much so.
And what was maybe a couple of points of that learning curve when you started to get back into dating and seeing other people?
I will be completely honest that it was hard mm-hmm. to date after. It wasn't hard to, hang out with somebody, but once to make that commitment to really have a relationship. Mm-hmm. And I remember with the first person that I dated for a period of time after, I felt myself like being afraid that I was going to sort of go back into this mindset or get defensive or think that if he says one thing, I'll interpret it as something else. Mm-hmm. And there's just this feeling that I didn't recognize at first, but had to sort of check myself and mm-hmm. say, not everyone is the same. So just because somebody says one thing, they may not mean it.
Yes.
I can't get defensive all the time, but I was definitely very open mm-hmm. Right off the bat that, hey, look, I'm coming out of this relationship. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I'm going to act. I don't know what I'm going to feel.
I think it's awesome, though, that you are willing to explore it. Mm. And it's a huge point for you that you were able to realize, I can't put on this new individual in my life the attitude, actions, and history of this other person. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people get stuck in that paradigm and associate their new partner with their old one. Right. And they start bringing in problems to their new relationship that never would be there. But it's because they can't separate their mindset mm-hmm. from the past.
And then taking it to the next level, where I am in my relationship right now and extremely happy, mm-hmm. is to also understand that people do nice things for you. Like, there are nice people in the world. And that's a hard thing to accept because mm-hmm. are they doing something nice? Because what's going on? When in fact they're
good people.
Just good people.
It's a good point to make, to just see people where they are, accept them for what they're showing you and telling mm-hmm. you, until you get new information.
Right. And I will not say it's all roses and butterflies all the time.
If you did, I wouldn't have in my podcast.
If anybody says that, that's not true.
Right.
But there's a different way to disagree.
Yes. And your mindset has changed, and you're able to do that. How has your mindset changed in that way to be able to handle this?
Yeah, it definitely has, to not be so defensive all the time, to actually speak up if something, on both sides, with me and the person that I'm dating. If something feels wrong, if we feel like we misunderstood somebody, to talk about it and not let that miscommunication just sort of fester. And communication is key.
Yes.
And if somebody's not willing to listen to you or blocks you out, that is also a telltale sign.
Absolutely. So let's go into some ways to help if we do see things. So we want to talk about some ways to help someone that we think may be in this type of relationship. The first thing is to acknowledge, support, and listen. Don't try to fix.
Yes.
I'm sure you may have had some fixers along the way.
Oh, yes.
Because it is natural.
Listen. That is the number one thing, because sometimes someone knows what they need to do. Sometimes they may already have a plan. Also, again, every situation is different. Make sure that person is safe. I have personally, even since then, because remember, I didn't know anyone who had ever gone through anything like this. Now I've met hundreds, thousands of people who have gone through this. And the question is always, are you safe? And even since then, I have even met people who have driven a U-Haul out and helped them, made them at a storage unit, unload their U-Haul while they're escaping in the middle of the night. And so just to make sure, like, are you safe? Do you know where this person is? Are they going to come find you right now? So really understanding that situation and making sure that somebody has a safety plan if it is
needed.
That severe level.
Yeah. The next point I wouldn't think would have to be said, but, some people don't pick up on cues. Don't be judgmental. Watch your mouth.
Right.
I'm sure you had some people say some things to you, like you said earlier, that just was not helpful.
Right. Yes. The one that was actually super common and I got asked so many times is, well, what did you do? And that just is not a good question. No. It's
never your fault that someone is physically abusive to you. Never. And
it just, that may sound like you're trying to help figure out what happened in this situation, but also realize that it's probably not the first time that something's happened, that this has been going on. So even if you ask the question, what did you do? Well, which time? What are you talking about? That's just not helpful.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything.
But there are different things that you can say, like when you're listening to them, if there was a particular instance, and you can kind of talk about that particular instance and, well, is this the first time that this happened?
Right.
Just to
Which is really just garnering more information. It's not, well, let me tell you what you should have done.
Let me tell you, right.
Yeah. I think the default concept will be just zip it.
Yes.
And listen.
Yes.
That would be the best way to go. Because unless you've been through that situation, you don't know what to do. You don't know how you would have handled yourself. So just be there for the person and listen.
And to also, on kind of the other side of the coin, if somebody says, I'm ready to leave, I don't have a safety plan, just because you may not know how to help that person develop a safety plan, there are resources. And so you may not be that person who's developing that safety plan, but you can help that take that to the next level.
Yeah. I also share that with health. When someone is in extreme pain, they're not thinking clearly. When someone is in an extreme situation like this, they're not thinking clearly. So if you're just there to be that voice of reason and research, just be that person. Yes. Just find the avenues. Be that clarity of thought for that person that can't think clearly in that moment.
Yes.
Another one that I think you touched on this earlier was continue the support after they leave, after the divorce is done.
Yes.
Don't They're okay now. They're away. They're okay now.
Yeah, so even to this day, this all happened for me 5 years ago. I still, to this day, have every voicemail that was left for me during that time on my cell phone. I refuse to delete them. I do listen to them sometimes, every now and then.
Yeah.
And also, there were people who had no idea what was going on, but knew that something, I was getting divorced or something was going on. And so they sent flowers and cards, and whether they knew or not.
Right.
And just being that support and knowing that I had people outside.
Right.
So this happened Super Bowl Sunday. Valentine's Day was soon after.
Yes.
And I had some friends that I will always remember. I was just talking about this as Valentine's Day, is around the same time, that came over and brought me Valentines and a funny little card, and I will never forget that.
That's amazing. And that's people that have a true heart for others.
Yes.
Just be thoughtful. And that's a good, maybe those of us that are on the outskirts, if we know someone that's been through this over the past 2 years, when a holiday comes up, do something for that person.
Yes.
Send them a blanket.
Yes, cozy blanket.
No, but seriously, that's a great tip for us that aren't involved in these things.
Holidays are tough.
Holidays are always tough for anyone that has had any traumatic event. So around the holidays, do something for someone that you know has been in this situation over the past few years.
And even those random holidays, because for me, years before my ex-husband and I had gotten married, every birthday it was his birthday, my birthday. We were texting, calling, or something. So remember not just the big holidays, because when the first year when both of our birthdays came around, that was really tough for me too.
And one way people can do that is to encourage involvement. So I can imagine, back to the health thing, you have two people that present with almost the exact same health situations. They're going to choose different paths. One is going to choose a path to do the things they need to do to get healed, and the other one is going to stay where they are and stay stagnant. So two individuals going through an abusive relationship are going to choose different paths. So one is going to choose the way of healing and recovery. One, because of certain decisions they make, may spiral down, and that's where you get into some very unsafe places, anxiety, depression, those type things. So as a friend on the outside, I can help them in that situation by saying, we're going out this weekend, we are going to a parade, we're going to whatever, but getting them to stay involved.
And that is huge, because even just calling or just sending a text saying, hey, because there were days, again, I was never alone, and now I'm in this house all by myself, that I was just sitting there going, I don't know, this is so weird.
Right.
And I would get a text or a call that would so simple, and it would just change everything.
It takes so little to encourage
and
someone.
It's not, as you said, and it's not just right after something like that. It's continuing on.
Yes.
Because 5 years later, the amount of messages and things that I received on Super Bowl Sunday was just that awesome reminder that people remember.
Yeah. And I think one point also to make when you see someone going through that situation is that you cannot rescue them from the immediate situation, and you can't rescue them from their pain and recovery. They have to do that on their own, but you can be a catalyst.
Yes.
You can be involved in the process for good.
Actually, that's such a good point, because one of my very dear friends, I had no idea she was dealing with what she was going through. And, I would check in, we talked, and she said, I'm separated. Things got really, really nasty. She was separated because my first question is, are you safe? Are you okay? And she says, I'm separated, but I'm not ready to get divorced yet. And I said, that's okay. That you don't have to. As long as you are safe right now, you make that decision on your own time. Because for somebody to come in and say, you have to do this right now, that's a hard process after you've just dealt with something, especially as severe as she had.
Yeah.
That it's okay. Don't push someone.
I think it's a good point to make, too, when you're in those situations, to shorten your time frame. You don't need to worry about what's going to happen next year, even next month.
Right.
If it's today, next minute, that's where you start.
Yes.
And that's how you start moving towards where you need to be. So you should definitely shorten your time frame. Don't put expectations on yourself that make the situation worse. So we've gone through this whole situation. Over the past several years, Super Bowl Sunday is always going to be.
It is.
It's going to be a day.
It is.
It's going to be quite a day for you because you can't unsee, you can't unfeel, but you can choose to put things in your life that push you in the right direction.
Yes.
And that's what I see that you have done.
Yes.
So as you have began to help people, see people where they are, and they're trying to move forward, you are encouraging them how to do that. And that may look like different things for different people.
Yes. And that is one of the things that I want to let people know, that there is hope after divorce and after abuse and divorce. And if you've hit your rock bottom, that you can come back. Yes. And that's where I am right now. And I could have never imagined that I would be where I am right now 5 years ago.
Right.
Because there was even a moment that I will never forget. I was on my couch. I was so angry. Had cried all day long and just didn't know what tomorrow looked like. And to now look back on that and not forget how I felt that day, but to see where I am today I have cut out negativity in my life and surround yourself with positivity.
Yes.
And I want to be that inspiration that there is hope afterwards.
Absolutely. So I think it's a great place to end this podcast is there is hope. If you're breathing, there is hope. Keep looking. That's the relentless mindset is keep looking for people. If you don't have the right people in your life, find new people.
Yes.
Keep searching, keep looking, do the things from rote memory that you need to do. Eat, drink water, get out of the house, wash.
It's okay to cut out that negativity.
It's totally okay. So any last words of inspiration or encouragement that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, my number one thing that I want those who domestic violence may affect your life, if you're going through it, you are not alone. There are so many resources. DomesticShelters.org, because I know you have listeners from all over.
Yes.
And so DomesticShelters.org is actually a database for all shelters and programs. So you can search by zip code and know there to go back.
And I was on that website and some other websites, and there is a plethora of information.
Yes, the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
There's just so much information. Yes. Yeah. So if you are a person experiencing it, if you are a friend of a person experiencing it, there is literature out there. There are people out there. There are outlets to find help.
And know that it's okay to talk about it.
Yes, that's the first step towards change.
Yes.
So we will have all this information for her website and these awesome blankets, which I will be taking home. This one.
Yay, confidence.
Yes. So thank you so much for being with us today. I hope it's been a blessing to you and an encouragement, and you've got some information that you can move forward with, either coming out of this situation or a friend of someone that is in it. So to continue to be relentless in your mindset for your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Hannah Kay, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. See you next time, guys.